honesty is praised as a virtue. From childhood, we are taught that truth sets us free, that openness builds trust, that revealing who we are is the path to connection, success, and moral superiority. We are told to speak our minds, to show our scars, to be authentic at all costs. And yet, beneath this comforting narrative lies a far more unsettling question. One most people never stop to ask: what if the very things you are encouraged to reveal are the things that make you controllable? History does not reward honesty in the way we like to believe it does. It never has. And few people understood this more clearly than Niccolò Machiavelli. Not the caricatured villain history often paints him as, but a sharp, unsentimental observer of human nature. Machiavelli did not write about how the world should be. He wrote about how it actually is. And what he saw was uncomfortable. People do not protect those who expose themselves. They exploit them. In the courts of Renaissance Italy, honesty was not noble, it was fatal. Power was fragile, alliances were temporary, and information traveled faster than loyalty. A misplaced confession, a revealed intention, a visible weakness could mean exile, imprisonment, or death. Machiavelli watched rulers rise and fall, not because they were cruel or kind, but because they misunderstood human nature. They believed honesty would earn goodwill. Instead, it painted a target on their backs. The ones who survived understood a brutal truth. Information is currency. And like any currency, it must be guarded. This is where modern society becomes dangerously deceptive. We are told we live in an age of enlightenment, of openness, of transparency. But the tools have changed, not the rules. Today, instead of whispered betrayals in candlelit halls, there are algorithms, data profiles, psychological targeting, and social leverage. The battlefield is digital. The weapons are invisible, and honesty has never been more profitable for those collecting it. Every detail you reveal about yourself becomes part of a pattern. Your beliefs, fears, desires, habits, frustrations, all of it forms a psychological map. And the one who holds that map holds power. This is what psychologists call asymmetric knowledge. When one side knows more about the other than vice versa, control naturally follows. Not always through force, but through influence, suggestion, and manipulation so subtle it feels like free will. This dynamic plays out everywhere. In workplaces, where being open about your struggles can quietly redefine how you're perceived. In relationships, where revealing too much too soon can shift the balance of power. And especially online, where vulnerability is rewarded with attention but archived forever. Every confession becomes data. Every truth becomes leverage. Machiavelli would not be surprised by this world. He would recognize it immediately. He understood that people respond not to truth, but to advantage. They do not ask, "Is this honest?" They ask, often unconsciously, "How can this serve me?" This is not cynicism. It is observation. The illusion of honesty is comforting because it feels moral. It feels human. But morality does not shield you from consequences. In fact, it often blinds you to them. When you reveal your inner world indiscriminately, you are not being brave, you are being exposed. And exposure, in a competitive and hierarchical world, is rarely neutral. This does not mean lying. Machiavelli was not advocating deception for its own sake. He was warning against naivete. Silence is not dishonesty. Privacy is not manipulation. Restraint is not weakness. They are forms of self-preservation. The most dangerous lie ever told is that everyone deserves access to you. They don't, and the belief that they do is what makes people predictable, exploitable, and easy to control as you move through the modern world. Constantly encouraged to share more, reveal more, confess more. Ask yourself a question Machiavelli would have considered essential. Who benefits from what I reveal? Because it is rarely just you. There are things about yourself that once exposed can never be taken back. Things that shift how others see you, treat you, and use you. Things that quietly reshape power dynamics in ways you may not notice until it's too late. And this leads to a disturbing realization. There are certain truths not because they are shameful, but because they are powerful that should never be revealed. Not because you are weak, but because the world is. Intentions feel harmless when they live only in your mind. They feel honest, even noble. To know what you want is to feel grounded, purposeful, alive. And in a culture obsessed with clarity and self-expression, we are encouraged to announce those intentions loudly. State your goals. Declare your dreams. Make your desires known. After all, how can anyone support you if they don't know what you're aiming for? Machiavelli would have called this a fatal mistake. In his world, intentions were not expressions of integrity. They were vulnerabilities. In Renaissance politics, to reveal what you intended to do was to invite interference. Once your enemies knew your direction, they could block the road. Once your allies knew your ambitions, they could negotiate against you or abandon you when the cost became inconvenient. History is littered with leaders who believed transparency would protect them, only to discover that it made them predictable. Consider the general who announces his strategy before the battle, trusting in honor and mutual respect. His enemy does not respond with admiration, but with adaptation. Troops are repositioned. Supply lines are cut. Traps are laid. The plan fails not because it was flawed, but because it was known. Machiavelli understood that foreknowledge is power. When others know your next move, they don't need to stop you directly. They simply need to prepare. This dynamic did not vanish with kings and castles. It evolved. Human beings are pattern recognition machines. We are constantly scanning for signals, intentions, motives, trajectories. The moment someone understands what you want, they begin adjusting themselves in relation to it. Sometimes this adjustment is subtle. A colleague who delays your progress. A friend who quietly competes. A superior who redefines your role. Sometimes it is overt, opposition, sabotage, ridicule. But it always follows the same logic. Your intention becomes a reference point, and once it exists, it can be used against you. Predictability is comforting, but it is also dangerous. To be predictable is to be manageable. This is why institutions crave transparency from individuals while guarding their own intentions so carefully. Corporations ask you about your goals. Platforms track your interests. Systems collect your preferences. They do this not to empower you, but to anticipate you, to steer you, to sell to you, to shape your behavior before you even realize a choice is being made. Machiavelli would recognize this immediately. He knew that those who control the flow of information control outcomes. And intentions, once revealed, become information for others to act upon. In modern life, this plays out constantly. In workplaces, being open about your ambition can quietly mark you as a threat or as someone to be used. In relationships, revealing exactly what you want can shift the balance of power, creating leverage where there was once mutuality. In social movements, announcing goals too early allows opposition to organize, discredit, and derail before momentum ever forms. Even online, intentions are currency. What you search for, what you like, what you plan to do next, all of it is harvested, categorized, and predicted. You are not being observed because you are special. You are being observed because you are legible, and this is the paradox society rarely admits. We are told that honesty about our intentions is a sign of confidence. But confidence does not protect you from interference. Clarity does not shield you from manipulation. In many cases, it accelerates it. Machiavelli did not argue for deceit as a lifestyle. He argued for strategic silence. There is a crucial difference. Concealment is not lying. It is refusing to give others a map of your future. It preserves what he understood to be essential: strategic ambiguity. The freedom to move without being anticipated. The power to act before resistance forms. When you reveal your endgame, you surrender that freedom. You turn yourself into a character in someone else's calculations, a variable to be managed, a pawn on a board you don't control. Those who survive power games are rarely the loudest or the most sincere. They are the ones who understand timing, who speak after acting, not before, who let results reveal intentions only when it no longer matters. And this is the haunting realization Machiavelli leaves us with. The people who appear the most open, the most transparent, the most earnest about what they want, are often the most exposed. Not because they are foolish, but because they believed the world would treat their honesty kindly. It won't, in a world that quietly punishes predictability. Revealing your true intentions is not an act of courage. It is an invitation. And once extended, it is rarely declined. Modern culture tells a comforting story about weakness. We are encouraged to share our struggles, to expose our insecurities, to wear vulnerability as a badge of authenticity. We are told that opening up creates connection, that revealing our pain invites empathy, that showing our flaws makes us human, and sometimes in safe and intimate spaces. This is true. But Machiavelli was not interested in how the world feels at its best. He was concerned with how it behaves at its worst. He understood something deeply unsettling: weakness, once revealed, rarely inspires compassion in environments governed by power. More often, it becomes leverage. In the brutal politics of Renaissance Italy, a ruler's private flaws were never private for long. A fear, a vice, a moment of doubt once discovered became a weapon. Rivals whispered it into the right ears. Allies quietly adjusted their loyalty. Public perception shifted. The ruler did not fall because he was weak, but because others knew where he was weakest. Machiavelli watched leaders lose everything not through force, but through exposure. A general's hesitation. A prince's need for approval. A statesman's emotional dependency. These were not moral failings. They were pressure points. And pressure points, once identified, invite pressure. This is not ancient history. It is human psychology. We subconsciously assess one another constantly, not through careful analysis, but through instinct. Who appears confident? Who hesitates? Who seeks reassurance? Who reveals fear? These signals shape how we categorize people, often without realizing it, into hierarchies of dominance and submission. This does not mean people are cruel by nature. It means they are adaptive. They respond to perceived strength and perceived fragility in predictable ways, when weakness is revealed to the wrong audience. The balance of power shifts permanently in friendships. This can mean being subtly dismissed, patronized, or taken for granted. In romantic relationships, it can create asymmetry: one partner becoming the emotional anchor, the other the dependent. In workplaces, vulnerability can quietly redefine how capable you are perceived to be, no matter how competent you actually are. Once an image forms, it is difficult to erase. Digital spaces amplify this effect. Confessions are encouraged, rewarded with attention and validation. But they are also archived, analyzed, and repurposed. Weakness becomes content. Pain becomes branding. And what begins as self-expression can end as self-surveillance. Machiavelli would not argue that emotions should be suppressed or denied. That is a misunderstanding of his insight. His warning was not against vulnerability itself, but against indiscriminate vulnerability. He understood that trust is not a universal currency. It must be earned, tested, and contained. Vulnerability without discernment is not courage. It is exposure. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Some people lack the capacity for empathy. Others see openness as opportunity. And some institutions actively engineer environments where confession is normalized not to heal, but to categorize, predict, and control. Corporations encourage employees to share personal struggles in the name of wellness. Then quietly factor those disclosures into decisions about reliability and leadership. Media platforms invite users to be real, while feeding those revelations into algorithms that shape attention and influence. Governments collect psychological data under the banner of safety and personalization, building profiles that reduce complex individuals into manageable patterns. In each case, weakness is not met with care. It is met with strategy. This is why Machiavelli's advice feels so uncomfortable today. It contradicts the moral language we prefer. It suggests that survival sometimes requires restraint, that self-protection can look like silence, that not every truth belongs in public view. Strength, in this sense, is not invulnerability. It is control. Control over what you reveal, when you reveal it, and to whom. It is the ability to choose your moments of openness rather than being pressured into them by cultural expectation. There is power in knowing that some parts of you are not accessible, that your fears are not publicly indexed, that your insecurities are not available for others to study and exploit. This does not make you closed. It makes you sovereign. Machiavelli understood that the world does not treat exposed weakness gently, it treats it efficiently. And in such a world, wisdom lies not in pretending you have no flaws, but in protecting them from those who would use them against you. Sometimes, silence is not avoidance. It is armor. There is a quiet form of power that rarely announces itself. It does not demand attention, does not dominate conversations, does not seek validation through display. It observes, it listens, and it waits. Machiavelli understood this power intimately. He believed that knowledge was most effective when it remained partially concealed. Because the moment you reveal how much you know, you invite resistance. History offers countless examples of this principle in action. In royal courts and war councils, survival often depended not on brilliance, but on the appearance of simplicity. Advisors who revealed the full extent of their intelligence too quickly became threats. They were challenged, sidelined, or removed. Those who survived learned to speak carefully, to let others underestimate them, to appear less informed than they truly were. Underestimation was not an insult. It was protection. Machiavelli watched men destroy themselves by displaying their intellect too openly. Knowledge, once exposed, triggers defensiveness. People do not respond neutrally to someone who appears smarter than they are. They respond emotionally. Pride is threatened. Status feels unstable. And when status feels threatened, people act not always rationally, but strategically. Psychologically, this reaction is deeply ingrained. Humans are social animals navigating invisible hierarchies. Intelligence is one of the most powerful status markers. When someone overtly demonstrates superior knowledge, it disrupts the perceived order. Others instinctively seek to restore balance, often by undermining credibility, questioning motives, or reframing expertise as arrogance. This is why the most dangerous thing you can do, in many environments, is to be obviously right. Truth does not protect you from resentment. In fact, it can intensify it. The one who knows too much becomes a target, not because they are wrong, but because they are inconvenient. But the opposite extreme is just as perilous. Revealing how little you know can permanently diminish how others perceive you. Ignorance, once exposed, becomes an invitation. People simplify information, withhold details, or manipulate decisions, assuming you will not notice. In power dynamics, perceived ignorance often leads to actual exclusion. Machiavelli understood that both extremes, displaying too much knowledge or too much ignorance, strip you of leverage. What remains is ambiguity. a space where others are unsure how much you understand, how far ahead you are thinking, or what you are capable of seeing. In that uncertainty, influence grows. This insight feels especially relevant in the modern world, where knowledge is constantly performed. Social media rewards certainty, hot takes, and public expertise. Debates are less about understanding and more about dominance. Everyone is encouraged to speak, to demonstrate awareness, to signal intelligence through opinions. Silence is interpreted as weakness. Nuance is mistaken for indecision. But this culture of constant display has consequences. When you reveal everything you know, you limit your flexibility. You lock yourself into positions that can be attacked, archived, and reframed. You become predictable. And predictability, as Machiavelli warned, invites control. In professional environments, this plays out subtly. The employee who always demonstrates expertise becomes indispensable, but also immovable. Their role solidifies. Their growth stalls. The one who asks careful questions, who withholds full analysis until the right moment, often gains more influence, not less. They are harder to categorize, harder to manage. Machiavelli believed that power operates best when others are unsure of its full extent. This is not deception. It is strategic restraint. Knowledge does not lose value when it is hidden. It gains it. Because it allows you to respond rather than react, to adapt rather than defend. The most effective thinkers throughout history were not those who spoke the most, but those who listened deeply. They gathered information quietly. They allowed others to reveal themselves. And when they finally spoke, their words carried weight not because they were frequent, but because they were precise. There is something unsettling about this idea. It suggests that intelligence is not proven through expression, but through control. That wisdom is not loud. That insight does not announce itself. Machiavelli's lesson cuts against modern instinct. He reminds us that knowledge is most dangerous not when it is spoken, but when it is quietly observed. When it remains flexible, unclaimed, and unchallenged. And perhaps the most disturbing implication of all is this: the smartest person in the room is rarely the one speaking confidently. More often, it is the one listening carefully, revealing nothing and waiting for the moment when silence becomes advantage. There is a moment, often unnoticed, when reason disappears and something else takes over. Your heart rate changes. Your muscles tense. Your thoughts narrow. And suddenly, you are no longer choosing your response, you are reacting. Machiavelli understood this moment well. He knew that power does not always require force. Sometimes, it only requires a trigger in royal courts. Emotional manipulation was an art. A ruler's pride could be stroked to provoke overconfidence. A rival's fear could be inflamed to force retreat. An advisor's insecurity could be exploited to gain loyalty. Machiavelli observed that those who mastered emotion did not need armies. They needed insight. Once you knew what moved a person emotionally, you could move the person themselves. Emotions are predictable. This is what makes them dangerous. Anger narrows perception. Fear accelerates compliance. Pride blinds judgment. Shame silences dissent. These reactions are not moral failures. They are biological responses. Neuroscience shows that strong emotions bypass the rational parts of the brain, activating older, faster systems designed for survival, not reflection. In these moments, logic is slower than instinct. And whoever can reliably trigger that instinct gains temporary control. Machiavelli saw this long before brain scans and psychology textbooks. He understood that emotional transparency, revealing what angers you, what wounds you, what makes you feel validated, is not neutral information. It is tactical intelligence. Once someone knows what provokes you, they no longer need to argue with you. They can simply press the button, This is as true now as it was centuries ago. Modern advertising is built on emotional triggers, not logic. Fear sells security. Insecurity sells beauty. Anger sells attention. Political movements thrive not by persuading minds, but by activating identities and resentments. Online platforms amplify content not because it is true, but because it reliably provokes outrage, pride, or anxiety. Every outrage cycle follows the same pattern. A trigger is introduced. Emotions spike. Reason collapses. Behavior follows. Shares, comments, purchases, votes. Control without command. And the more emotionally transparent you are, the easier this becomes. When your triggers are public, they are exploitable. When your insecurities are known, they are profitable. When your pride is visible, it can be steered. Machiavelli would recognize the modern individual as unusually exposed. We announce what offends us, what excites us, what validates us. We call this authenticity, but in hostile or competitive environments, this is not authenticity. It is exposure. This does not mean emotions should be suppressed or denied. That misunderstanding leads to numbness, not strength. Machiavelli's insight was more precise. Emotional sovereignty comes from mastery, not repression. From knowing what moves you and refusing to let others use it against you. When someone knows your emotional triggers, they gain influence over your timing, your tone, your decisions. They can rush you, bait you, distract you. They can turn your attention away from substance and toward reaction. This is how manipulation thrives, not by forcing action, but by hijacking response. The most controlled individuals are not emotionless. They are selective. They feel deeply, but privately. They observe provocation without immediately answering it. They create space between stimulus and response. In that space, power returns. Machiavelli understood that emotional restraint is not coldness. It is autonomy. It is the difference between being acted upon and acting deliberately. Those who guard their emotional triggers remain unpredictable. Those who reveal them become programmable. This is why the modern world feels so exhausting. You are constantly being pulled, provoked, stimulated. Every headline, notification, and comment competes for emotional reaction. And the more you react, the easier you are to guide. The uncomfortable truth is this: whoever controls your emotions controls your decisions. Not forever. Not absolutely. But often enough to matter. Machiavelli's warning is not to become indifferent. It is to become aware, to recognize when emotions are being targeted, when reactions are being engineered, when your inner world is being used as a lever. Because once you understand this, something shifts. Provocation loses its grip. Triggers weaken. And control begins to move back where it belongs. Inside, power does not always announce itself. Often, it arrives quietly, already in motion, already irreversible. Machiavelli understood this better than most. He believed that anticipation is a weapon and that surprise is its sharpest edge. To reveal your next move is to dull that edge before it ever strikes. In war, this principle was absolute. Armies that announced their strategies did not inspire respect. They invited counter-strategy. Once an enemy knew where you were going, they did not need to stop you directly. They could weaken supply lines, reposition forces, or wait patiently for exhaustion to do the work. Many campaigns failed not because they were poorly conceived, but because they were anticipated. The same logic governed political intrigue. A ruler who revealed reforms too early gave rivals time to undermine them. A leader who declared intent before consolidating power often found resistance already organized by the time action began. Machiavelli observed that plans die in the space between announcement and execution. That space gives opposition time to breathe. This is not merely historical. It is psychological. human beings are instinctively defensive. When we know what is coming, we prepare. We resist. We adapt. Predictability triggers countermeasures almost automatically. This is why surprise is so destabilizing and so effective. It bypasses preparation. It collapses resistance before it forms. Machiavelli understood that once your future actions are known, they no longer belong fully to you. They become part of someone else's calculations. Your momentum slows, not because anyone confronts you directly, but because invisible obstacles begin to appear. In modern life, this pattern repeats endlessly. Career moves announced too early attract scrutiny, jealousy, and quiet obstruction. Creative projects revealed prematurely invite criticism before they have the strength to stand on their own. Personal transformations declared publicly often collapse under the weight of expectation and external judgment. And yet, people continue to announce their next move. Why? Because silence is uncomfortable. Because anticipation feels like progress. Because validation feels like momentum. Social systems reward intention over execution. Likes, praise, encouragement, these are given not for results, but for declarations. And so people trade surprise for approval, unknowingly sacrificing leverage for reassurance. Machiavelli would see this as a strategic error. Approval does not build power. Movement does. Silence, in this sense, is not passivity. It is compression. Energy stored rather than dispersed. When actions are kept private, they unfold before resistance can mobilize. By the time opposition reacts, the shift has already occurred. History's most decisive changes often followed this pattern. Alliances formed quietly. Movements grew unnoticed. Strategies were executed before they were understood. By the time the world realized what had happened, it was already too late to reverse. Machiavelli framed this lesson with brutal clarity. Movement beats intention. Action beats announcement. Results silence opposition more effectively than promises ever could. The danger of revealing your next move is not just external resistance. It is internal erosion. Once you announce a plan, part of the psychological reward is already received. Motivation weakens. Urgency fades. The mind mistakes intention for accomplishment. And without realizing it, you lose the very drive required to follow through. Those who master timing understand this instinctively. They move quietly. They prepare privately. They reveal outcomes, not plans. This does not make them deceptive. It makes them effective. In a world that constantly encourages disclosure, this restraint feels countercultural. But Machiavelli never cared about cultural comfort. He cared about outcomes. And the outcome of premature revelation is almost always the same: diminished power. There is something unsettling about realizing how many ambitions fail not because they were unrealistic, but because they were visible, not because they were weak, but because they were known. The final image Machiavelli leaves us with is stark. The most decisive shifts in history did not arrive with announcements or explanations. They arrived quietly, already complete. No warning, no debate, just movement. And by the time anyone thought to ask what was happening, it was already done. Power has a strange effect on people. When it is visible, it unsettles them. When it is obvious, it provokes them. When it is flaunted, it invites resistance. Machiavelli understood this paradox deeply. The more openly power is displayed, the more aggressively it is challenged. And the more quietly it operates, the more difficult it is to confront in the courts of history. Rulers rarely fell because they were weak. They fell because they appeared too strong. Overt dominance breeds fear, and fear breeds unity. Rivals who might otherwise compete with one another suddenly find common cause. Allies grow nervous. Subordinates grow resentful. The visible center of power becomes a target not because it is unjust. But because it is undeniable, Machiavelli observed that the most enduring figures were not those who proclaimed their strength, but those who disguised it. Some rulers appeared indecisive while quietly consolidating authority. Others projected humility while controlling key institutions behind the scenes. They survived not by dominating attention, but by managing perception. This is not deception for vanity's sake. It is strategic restraint. Psychologically, humans are wired to respond to perceived dominance with resistance. When someone is clearly more powerful, wealthier, more influential, more intelligent, it triggers comparison. Comparison triggers insecurity. And insecurity seeks relief through opposition. Even those who benefit from the powerful often feel an unspoken urge to cut them down to size. This is why overt power rarely lasts. It becomes too visible to ignore. Machiavelli understood that power functions best when it is ambiguous. When people are unsure how much influence you truly possess, how far your reach extends, or where your limits are, they hesitate. They act cautiously. They overestimate risk. Ambiguity creates psychological space. And in that space, control grows. History is filled with figures who mastered this art. Advisors, who shaped empires while remaining publicly insignificant. Financiers, who influenced nations without holding office. Strategists who appeared secondary while directing outcomes. Their strength was not in what they showed, but in what they concealed. The modern world is no different, only louder. Today, power takes many forms. Money, attention, knowledge, networks, social capital, and the instinct to display it is everywhere. Wealth is flaunted. Influence is quantified. Intelligence is broadcast. But the more power is displayed, the more it attracts scrutiny, envy, and sabotage. Those who broadcast success invite investigation. Those who announce influence invite challenge. Those who signal dominance invite opposition. The spotlight, while flattering, is also dangerous. It exposes pressure points. It reveals scale. It makes power legible and, therefore, manageable. Machiavelli would argue that true power does not seek recognition. It seeks results. It shapes outcomes quietly, without demanding acknowledgement. It allows others to underestimate it, dismiss it, or misunderstand it until it is too late to intervene. This is deeply counterintuitive in a culture that equates visibility with importance. We are taught that power must be asserted, branded, demonstrated. But assertion is not control. Often, it is compensation. The most effective forms of power operate indirectly. They influence incentives rather than issuing commands. They shape environments rather than confront individuals. They make certain outcomes more likely without forcing them openly, and because they are subtle, they are rarely resisted. Machiavelli believed that survival depended not on dominance, but on perception management. To appear less powerful than you are is to avoid becoming a threat. To avoid becoming a threat is to avoid becoming a target. And to avoid becoming a target is to gain time to act, to consolidate, to endure. This does not mean shrinking yourself or denying capability. It means understanding that power revealed is power contested. Power concealed is power preserved. There is a quiet elegance to this idea. It suggests that strength does not need to announce itself. That influence does not need applause. That control does not need spectacle. In the end, Machiavelli leaves us with a final, unsettling thought. Power is not what you show the world. It is what the world cannot see but must still respond to. And those who understand this do not rule loudly. They rule last throughout history. Silence has been misunderstood. It is often mistaken for fear, for submission, for the absence of conviction. We are taught to fill every gap with explanation, to justify ourselves constantly, to reveal who we are before we are asked. In a world that rewards visibility, silence feels like a liability. Machiavelli saw it differently to him. Silence was not weakness. It was sovereignty. The ability to choose what remains unseen, what remains unsaid, what remains unknowable. In that choice lived power, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that endures. Across every principle explored here, a pattern emerges. Those who reveal their intentions lose leverage. Those who expose their weaknesses invite exploitation. Those who display their knowledge provoke resistance. Those who announce their next move surrender surprise. Those who expose their emotional triggers give others control. And those who flaunt their power become targets. In each case, the mistake is not moral. It is strategic. Modern culture tells us the opposite. We are encouraged to share constantly, to narrate our lives, to make ourselves legible. Transparency is framed as virtue, and mystery as suspicion. But this narrative hides an uncomfortable truth. Openness is profitable for systems that observe, categorize, and influence. Restraint, on the other hand, is inconvenient. It cannot be easily measured or managed. Machiavelli was not cynical for the sake of cynicism. He was honest about human behavior. He understood that most people do not interact with others as ideals, but as variables. They respond to incentives, fears, and opportunities. When you give away too much of yourself, you reduce yourself to a pattern that can be anticipated and controlled. This does not mean withdrawing from the world or refusing connection. It means choosing discernment over compulsion, trust over exposure, timing over impulse. Silence, in this sense, becomes an act of self-respect. There is a quiet strength in being unreadable, not deceptive, but private, not distant, but selective. When others cannot fully predict you, they must treat you with caution. When they cannot access your inner world freely, they must earn it. Mystery, far from being a flaw, becomes a form of protection. This is why Machiavelli's ideas continue to unsettle. They challenge comforting illusions about fairness and transparency. They force us to confront a reality we would rather deny, that power does not reward sincerity as much as it rewards awareness. In the end, the lesson is not to manipulate others. It is to avoid being manipulated yourself. To understand that every piece of information you release changes the balance of power, however subtly. And to recognize that you are not obligated to be fully known in a world that does not fully care. Silence, then, is not retreat. It is positioning. It is the space where intention gathers strength, where observation sharpens insight, where action prepares to emerge without interference. The most powerful individuals throughout history were not the loudest. They were the most contained. They revealed themselves slowly, deliberately, and on their own terms. And perhaps the most haunting truth of all is this: those who know everything about you do not necessarily understand you. They understand how to influence you. They do not protect you. They control you. Asterisk.